the first candle in honor of Islam. Christian, Jew, Muslim, shaman, Zoroastrian, stone, ground, mountain, river. Each has a secret way of being with the mystery, unique and not to be judged. We light the second candle in honor of Buddhism. There is no significant division between us and other people because of our basic natures are the same. If we wish to ensure everyone's peace and happiness, we need to cultivate a healthy respect for the diversity of our peoples and cultures, founded on an understanding of this fundamental sameness of all human beings. We light the third candle in honor of Christianity. If the foot should say, "Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body," that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, "Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body," that would not make it any less part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, there would be the sense of hearing. If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? We light the fourth candle in honor of Judaism. The beauty of creation, as we believe and as a science ever more wondrously shows, is that unity above creates diversity below. And the more complex the life form, the greater the diversity. We light the fifth candle in honor of Hinduism. To see the unity and diversity is yoga, union, to see the same consciousness in everyone. Whoever realizes that union will always love the whole universe as part of his or her own self. We light the sixth candle in honor of Taoism. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare to compete, everybody will respect you. We light the seventh candle in honor of Sikhism. There is but one breath. All are identical in matter, and among all the entire light is the same. The one light is contained among all the different and diverse things. April's theme, promote diversity and inclusion, immortality, our story. This is by Ernest Holmes. I believe in the internality, the immortality, and the continuing of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. Short and sweet. So go ahead and go within with me for a few minutes of contemplation. So how good it is to be right here, right now, in this moment, knowing that we are absolutely immersed in that divinity, that comes from us, as us, and through us, all around us at all times. This dynamic power of God is right here orchestrating this service. It is in divine order and divine right action through what Reverend Cece is speaking that touches our heart, through the band and the music and the lyrics that are sung, through the children's church and all of us as the congregation. And so I know that we are absolutely blessed, and knowing that it is just so good. We are so loved, and so it is. Amen.
So happy Easter. I heard a minister at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. say that there's a 1,600-year-old tradition in the church of starting every Easter talk with a joke. It's called the Risus Paschalis, the Easter laugh. So there was this guy driving down the street, and the Easter bunny was hopping down the street, and he braked, but the Easter bunny ran right in front of him, and he hit the bunny and killed it. And their basket went all over the place, and the candy went all over the place, and the guy got out of his car and went over to make sure that what had happened, and there lay this colorful little bunny dead, and the man was so distraught he sat down and started to cry. And a woman was driving past and saw this man sitting at the side of the road crying, so she pulled over and said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I accidentally hit the Easter bunny and killed it. The kids are going to be so disappointed. What should I do?" She said, I know what to do. So she went over to her car and got in the trunk and pulled out a spray can. She walked over to the rabbit, took off the cap, and sprayed the bunny thoroughly with what was in the can. And a minute later, the Easter bunny jumped up and gathered up his eggs and chocolate and waved and hopped on down the road. The man said, "What'd you do? What was in that can?" She turned it over so he could read the label and said, "Hairspray gives life to dead hair." Maybe it's a Gronus pascalis, rather than a Rufus pascalis, right? So I started off with this idea that we'd planned, this idea about immortality, but I kind of got pulled in a different direction as I was contemplating Holy Week and Easter Sunday. We've been talking from this book by Tracy Brown, a practitioner, and our home office, our international bodies Board of Trustees chair. She wrote this book called Stained Glass Spirit. And I came across this quote. She said, "Ignoring the beauty and value and uniqueness of different types of people is equivalent to ignoring God and refusing to see all the ways God shows up as humanity." And it occurs to me that the biblical Easter story is a pretty radical example. The story of a pretty radical example of what humanity may do if we, its members, choose to ignore parts of God. If we choose not to embrace and understand different people and their different perspectives. I mean, look at the news this morning. We see it from Sri Lanka. Churches bombed because someone is refusing to acknowledge that the hundreds of people that were there are people, parts of God, expressions of the Divine One. See, it's embracing and understanding this essential message that Jesus was really all about. He hung out with the people who were ignored by society, right? Tax collectors, of course, I don't know who'd want to hang out with them anyway, but, tax collectors and fallen women and lepers and people who had mental illness and all kinds of people. That's who Jesus hung out with. He saw the divine in them and made them the point of his parables and other teachings. The Sermon on the Mount is all about those that society thinks of as ignorable, right? The meek, the poor, those kinds of people. And Jesus knew personally what rejection meant because all of his life, all the stories about him are about him being rejected. Judea rejected him as too different, not mainstream, not acceptable. And it started really early on in the stories. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, a despised place. And in John 1, the disciple Philip goes to get on Jesus' instruction, he goes to fetch another disciple whose name is Nathanael of Cana, I think, yes. So Philip says to Nathanael, "We found the one about whom the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael says, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" I mean, wow, that's a pretty damning statement, isn't it? Even his despised Nazareth rejected him. Though right after he spent the 40 days in the desert, he came back to his home synagogue and read and spoke, and people started to whisper, "Hey, isn't that the carpenter's son? Who does he think he is, getting up here in front of the synagogue?" And so after he finished, they chased him out of town. And in several cities in Galilee, he was rejected as well. Before he went to Jerusalem, he tried to go to a village in Samaria, but they told him to go away. In John 6, there's a story about where a lot of his followers left him because they said his teaching was just too hard. It was too different. They couldn't handle it. The whole prevailing culture of Jesus' time rejected him. And then society, because he was different from what they expected, they rejected him so ferociously that ultimately he was crucified. See, evolving humans, we come from a very tribal state where anybody not like us is to be afraid of. But I was hoping we'd evolved, and I think Jesus was hoping the same thing. Have we evolved in us enough to understand that the divine exists in everyone? We've been like this for tens of thousands of years. And yes, many of us have evolved, and some of us are still that way. We have been terrified of the radical love that Jesus was talking about, and all the spiritual masters of all the ages have called us to. We've been terrified of that. We've been terrified to extend the real sumptuous, no-holds-barred welcome that these spiritual teachers call us to. We're afraid that we'll lose something if we extend that kind of love to the world. And that fear is still reverberating in our culture. And many of us have experienced it landing on us hard, right? Some of us have known soul-killing prejudice in our lives, racism, homophobia. We were different enough that people rejected us for our outsides, and others have been rejected for our insides. You know, if we get tired of fitting in and we decide to fully be who we are, as one Facebook meme put it, we decide to let our freak flag fly. We decide to let our freak flags fly. There we go. We get rejected, right? If our skin is a different color than those holding the power, we are rejected. If our sexual identity is unlike that of the majority in power, we are rejected. Even some of us who've been very privileged have had parts of us killed by someone who tells us that something we're doing is not good enough, smart enough, mainstream enough, talented enough, etc., etc., etc. I'm not saying my experience is anything like being equivalent to that of a person of color or a transgender person or a person with a disability. What I'm saying is we have all had parts of us destroyed by rejection. It ought to inspire empathy in all of us, but in some of us it inspires fear because we're afraid we'll be rejected again. Some of us are degraded because of our backgrounds, or some of us because of the way we dress or think or talk, or some of us because of our socioeconomic status or sexual orientation. It seems like there's always somebody who out of their own fear is willing to put us down. We each have a whole different set of scars, right? And sometimes that rejection and that degradation is crushing. Sometimes it feels like there's not a tomb big enough to hold all those parts of ourselves that have died along the way of walking through this thing called life. The parts of ourselves that have been invalidated, discriminated against, humiliated, violated, rejected, misrepresented, betrayed, or otherwise degraded. You know, the murderous projections of other people's pain can kill parts of us. You know, the other thing that all the spiritual teachers tell us is that life is meant to be a story of being born in extravagant love, to extravagant love. But we start to learn early on this fear of difference, this fear that those people who are not like us are to be avoided. And that fear, that guy's going to keep me on track, isn't it, Rita? That fear starts to dominate our whole journey. It dominates our journey when somebody else's fear leads them to hurt us, and it dominates our journey when our fear leads us to hurt someone else. So instead of being dominated by infinite love, our journey is dominated by fear. See, Good Friday is our story. It's our story too. The story of what happens when the fear of difference, the fear of radical love and welcome runs rampant. When the fear gets too great, the object of the fear is killed. It's also the story of what happens within us when something dies because it's been rejected. And sometimes within us and outside of us, those wounds take some time to sort of dissipate, for healing to start to happen, and for us to come back to an awareness of spirit. My friend, Reverend Christian Sorensen calls this tomb time. Tomb time is where we first start to begin to heal and learn and grow in our awareness. And at some point, we come back to an awareness of spirit, of God, of the infinite amount of love that exists for us and as the universe. Love with a capital L, love in spite of appearances. Today is Easter, and it too is our story, because it's about something that happens for all of us. This is from a Catholic priest. He's a liberal Catholic priest, yes, but he's a Catholic priest nonetheless, Richard Rohr. In today's meditation, he said, Easter isn't celebrating a one-time miracle as if it only happened in the body of Jesus. Easter is our story. I have a friend who's a minister in the United Church of Christ, and she made this post on Friday I wanted to share with you because it just says a lot. She wrote this on Good Friday. For me, Good Friday is not the most important day of this Holy Week. I think it is the day we humans show how scared we are of radical love. I think today is the day that shows we're not to give up on those ideas just because the world rejects them. I think today is the day we all need to reflect on what we can and will do to midwife the birth of a culture of justice, kindness, and humility. I think today is necessary. But Sunday, that's the day God shows us that yes, humanity, this is possible. This is my dream for you. Watch, learn, and have hope. I love that post, because that's what we're doing in the tomb time. We're remembering that this is possible. We're remembering that we started out in something not fearful, but infinitely loving. And we grab onto that. We grab onto the love. Because when that radical, extravagant love we're born in responds to crushing, outrageous pain, healing happens. Healing happens. The moment comes. The moment comes when we hear that response from Spirit. Spirit's answer to this killing, this crucifixion, is resurrection, right? The opportunity for us to transcend the shame and the hurt and the rejection. The opportunity to heal our sense of separation by realizing the radical, outrageous, immortal love of the universe. That is who we are. That is who we are. The story of Easter is Spirit reminding us that the way of life in outrageous love is possible, and that the way of life in outrageous love is the way we create something new. And then the next moment comes. There's an invitation that says, roll away the stone and step out of here. Get out of this darkness. Step from what has been into what is trying to happen through you. We may walk out and have the same body and the same circumstances and the same friends, but we are different. We're different after that point. We walk out with new understanding, more light, more of that anointed consciousness that kind of birthed us. And we realize that we're the ones who bring the light. We're the radical welcomers. We're the extravagant lovers. Not anybody else, it's us. It's us, it's us. That's what today is about. Boy, sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Sometimes it's really hard to do that. It's hard to believe it's even possible. You know, in the Bible, there's another story at the end of all this. There were these 3 women who went to Jesus' tomb, and they didn't go to celebrate. They went to anoint his body. They did not expect the tomb to be empty. And there are parts of us who keep going back to that old wound and saying, I don't know, maybe I'll just go back here. You know, maybe I'll just go hang out with the dead parts of myself. But there was somebody there who said, he is not here, he is risen. And finally they got it. And they went to find the rest of the disciples, and then they went to tell the rest of the world what they just experienced. You know, that eventually all of us will catch up to this heart that says yes to that radical, extravagant love, and that yes to that open-hearted, open-armed welcome that we're all about. Something bigger and more joyful and kinder and humbler and more humble starts to come through us. And eventually the world catches up. The whole story of Jesus' life is about this. It's about this paradox of being apparently limited and unlimited, human and divine at the same moment. You know, he hung out with, as I said, the unworthy, which, you know, that's how he leaned into his divine side, was by showing love and compassion to these kinds of people that society rejected. And right up to the moment he entered Jerusalem on a donkey. A donkey? That is not the most luxurious mode of transport, right? Pretty humble. Leaning to his human side there, showing up the apparent limitations of humanness. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey and wound up being crucified because he was too much the other. But the story tells us he rolled away the stone and he returned to the world with more light, more love, and more consciousness. And so, let's think about our own tomb time. How willing are we to learn its deep lessons? How willing are we to respond to that touch of infinite love that reaches our hearts? How willing are we to do the work of rolling away that stone? To step out without fear and into greater love. We have a choice. We can stay there in the dark if we want. We can stay there in our fear and our prejudice and our old wounds and stay away from that greater experience of good, of God, of love, of welcome. But are you willing? Are you willing to believe that there might be a great gift in that time, in that tomb time? Are you willing to hear the whisper of the voice of love? Are you willing to allow the stone to be rolled away? Are you willing to step out of the dark and into that greater world where you bring the light, you bring your gifts, you bring the love, you bring the welcome? Are you willing to believe that you can create a new world? I am. Join me.